Welcome back to the Daily Dope Show. I'm your host, Brando, the Weed Commando, and my qualifications are that I care about this stuff and I pay attention to it, and I have for a long time. And I've been in this kind of like fight to legalize for a long time, a very long time. And other than that, um, I know where to find good information. And in this case, since we're talking about weed news, might as well say that Marijuana Moment is your best and most trusted source in weed news. And I always want to send people their way. If you don't know about them, go check them out. Um, and here, this is another part to my four-part series of the fall recap. And basically, I haven't really been doing daily or even weekly shows for a long time. I've been kind of on this long hiatus of chill, like not worrying about what's going on in the weed news world. But if you ever do decide to check into what is going on, I'm going to put a link in the description below for my friends over at the over at the Reefer Revolution. And as a matter of fact, I feel kind of bad right now because they're live right now. And I mean, I almost feel like, going in there and hitting the button and checking and see what's going on over there, but I don't want to step on their toes. And that's why I'm putting this clip out kind of later or tomorrow or maybe even the next day because I like them to get as many views as possible, and I've been on their show a few times, so go over at Reefer Revolution on YouTube and many other platforms, and give them a check out. All right, so let's get into the stories that we have today. The final update of this fall update, where I'm kind of reaching back to get these stories, but they're kind of important, and this is a great example right here. This story right here is one of the reasons why I stopped doing these clips where I pay attention to everything happening. Because if you look at New Jersey, they've been talking about legalizing marijuana for like 5 years now. Ever since Christie was still governor. The Senate was putting stuff on the floor to, legalization packages and stuff, and Christie was saying he was going to veto them. And we remember all that because every year we go through the same thing with just the regular legislator and now a Democratic governor who promised to legalize marijuana within the first 100 days or something. He had some kind of a wild, promise that he made when he was running. And the same can be said about a couple other states on the East Coast. So they all decided to get together. Governors of the northeastern states adopt a coordinated marijuana legalization plan, and we know why they did this. This is just so they could do this foot dragging for another year or maybe even longer as one solid unit instead of a bunch of states that are right next door to each other. So if somebody legalizes like Vermont, and now you have like states all around you that have legal marijuana and you don't, it starts to look like you're kind of like holding out. The people in your state are really getting kind of mad about this. So let's go ahead and read this article by Kyle Yeager. A group of governors representing states across the Northeast convened on Thursday for a marijuana summit at which they agreed to basic principles for legal cannabis programs they plan to pursue in 2020. And these are the states that, like I keep talking about, I got sick of doing stories about how they couldn't agree on finer details or it got stuck in some committee, and it just, by the end of August every year, the sessions were about to come to a close and nobody was getting any word on what the status was. And then the next year they come back, and it's not like they just pick up where they left off. They just start all the way back from the beginning. Oh, let's put something on the floor and argue about it and hammer out some finer details and then send it to a committee to die. So you have New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, Connecticut Governor Ned Lamont organizing the meeting. They were joined by New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy, and Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf, who came out in favor of legalization last month. Representatives from Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Colorado also attended. Quote, "This is a very important topic," Cuomo said in his opening statement. "It's probably one of the most challenging issues I know of I've had to address in the state of New York." Yeah, only because you almost, you got threatened from the left by a challenger in your primary for re-election by Cynthia Nixon, who wanted to legalize marijuana, and she actually pushed Cuomo into the position of legalizing marijuana in that bid for his office. So that's how it works, man. If people don't like your position, then they challenge you. And he says that it is complicated, it is controversial, and it is consequential. That is very difficult and challenging combination. It's consequential because if you don't do it right, you can do harm. And the whole purpose here is to do good. And I don't understand this logic, because this is one of those drag your feet arguments, I think, because it's like you're automatically saying that we have to do it right, and that can be interpreted from many different ways, from every angle. Are you talking about you have to do it right or you can do harm because the wrong people are going to be able to get their hands on marijuana, which nobody's saying that we're trying to legalize it for anybody under 21 is what everybody's proposing. So come on. What else are you talking about? Because you're going to do harm. All right. You're doing harm by not legalizing every single day because people are getting charged with marijuana crimes. And also, even if you decriminalize, which New York's decriminalized package isn't the best, but it's not the worst either. But even if you decriminalize, you still have to account for how people are getting their products. That's black market, 100%, no regulations. So you only solved about half of the problem, and not even really that good. And it's just more things to haggle about. Well, do we want dispensaries to be able to sell this or that? Every little detail of a marijuana legalization package will be something you could argue about. And let's see what else they got. This makes sense, sitting down, working together with New Jersey, working together with Pennsylvania and our other neighbors to make sure that what we do is we do it on a standardized basis. We do it on a well-regulated basis and where health and safety are paramount, the governor said. I think we're much stronger when we work together, and that's what this meeting is all about. And to me, whenever three governors who haven't been able to get marijuana legalization accomplished in their states, that's been trying for as many as 4 years or more, I don't see how all of these people getting together is going to, be better for solving this problem of getting this done, or B, it sounds like shady stuff to me. It just sounds shady. The governors agreed to determine an ideal tax scheme for marijuana and impose certain limitations to licensing to ensure fair and competitive market. The taxes will also be designed to prevent an increase in consumption, which is ridiculous. Now, when you're talking about ensure a fair and competitive market, so what would limitations on licensing do towards that end? Who are you limiting that's going to be trying to get a license to make sure it's a fair and competitive market? That's ridiculous also, because basically, even in the most prohibition-prone states like Alabama, there's already a market that exists for marijuana. And there's probably growers, there's distributors, there's processors, there's people that make edibles in their kitchen. There's already a thriving market in even a place like Alabama, who ain't even talking about legalizing anything. But when you're talking about places like anywhere on the East Coast, they're famous for their markets. There's a freaking strain, East Coast Sour Diesel, I think, named after these famous underground markets. All you need to do is bring them into the light. Talking about limiting licenses. That doesn't sound like you're talking about making this fair and competitive. And then here we go back to this. Importantly, the officials said their systems will include, quote, social equity initiatives to ensure industry access to those who have been disproportionately impacted by the prohibition of cannabis, and to prioritize, quote, small and diverse businesses' participation in the cannabis industry. That's the most important one. Prioritize the small and diverse businesses. Equity can only be achieved through ownership, and even so, all these things where they talk about doing this equity stuff, but in practice, they don't. And I have a Vice News clip. Oh, darn. Do I have that? I thought I had that. Where was that? Anyway. There's a clip on Vice News talking about the corporate dispensaries versus the black market. What's the future of cannabis? And basically, there's people that are already still trying to be operators that are going to be affected, that are in these communities that you keep talking about are getting hurt the most by the drug prohibition. You're still not prioritizing them. You're still limiting the actual licensing to people that can afford it. And your equity program is still not working because you're saying, like, a lot of these marijuana laws that were passed over the last few years have these weird clauses in it that I know as an activist I would have never put in there, but it says that you can't get a job at a dispensary or a grow facility if you've had a felony within the last 10 years or something like that. Now that's just absurd, you know? And then for you to sit here and say, oh, we're going to give back to the communities that were affected the most by the prohibition of marijuana, and then you're not taking that into consideration, and you're literally telling people that went to jail for marijuana that they can't get a job at the grow op, or someone was busted for dealing marijuana. Oh, guess what? You can't sell marijuana legally in a dispensary for 10 years, buddy, after you get out of jail. And also, the guy that got caught growing, he can't get a grow license. But this isn't how you do this. It's not. All right, another policy calls for the implementation of meaningful social justice reform with regard to cannabis policy, including expediting expungements or pardons, waiving fees associated with expungements or pardons, and securing legislation to support these reforms. I mean, we've seen the answer to that. It's called, there's a computer. Everything's done on the computer, right? So you go on the computer and you find people that line up with these crimes that are no longer crimes, and then you automatically expunge their records. When pardons you're talking about, I'm sure everybody that's in jail for a stupid marijuana crime, as soon as you change the rules and laws, they're going to let you know, let me out of here. This is bullshit. Because it is absolutely bullshit to still see someone getting punished for something that's not even illegal anymore, that should have never been illegal in the first place. And again, all you need to do is basically do these things. In terms of public health, the governors were in consensus about imposing restrictions on modes of cannabis consumption and advertising. They said they will prohibit advertising that targets youth and create strict penalties for selling marijuana to those under 21. Public education campaigns will also be utilized to, quote, inform youth and general public about the health and safety consequences of cannabis use. Which is, I guess you always have to have them, you know, people saying that you need that crap in anything that they're going to agree on. And to ensure public safety, the governors said they agreed to have uniform standards for law enforcement trained as drug recognition experts to identify impaired drivings. Methods will be developed to target the illicit market and identify bad actors in the industry. And this is all just feel-good, right-wing, authoritarian stuff that also gets added to any kind of legalization ever agreed upon. And it's just ridiculous. We already seen, the prison industrial complex just reeling at every turn when legalization was happening, with their lobbies dumping money into anti-legalization campaigns from coast to coast. And the only bad actors in anything is the fact that there's for-profit prisons in America, the land of the free. So don't give me your crying about how you need to, shore up the lack of arrests by acting like you're going after impaired drivers that are impaired because they smoked marijuana. You're just that you don't need to increase your budget for that. I'm not interested in any of these quotes or anything because I could really care less. I think this is just another act of foot dragging that's going to go on for another year at least. Do you think that when the new session comes back that they're going to put some bills on the floor and get it done? Let's see. I doubt it. I mark my words, man. I'll be back here a year from now doing a report about something, I'm sure. And I will revisit this and see if these guys did anything in the way of legalizing marijuana in any of these states, let alone all of them. Come on. The governors each represent states where lawmakers have unsuccessfully attempted to legalize marijuana. Efforts stalled in New York following months of negotiation between Cuomo and the legislature, with disagreements centering on issues such as tax rates and how revenue would be earmarked. And that's just the taxes. Imagine there's so many other little nuanced things that they could nitpick about and argue about. And you're always going to have prohibitionists leaning hard on the right over there, like acting like that they still have some kind of say in the conversation, even though people that want to have marijuana fully banned and made criminal penalties for it, there's like literally just 50 of them left in the whole country, but somehow they got representation in every fucking state house in the fucking world, especially on the East Coast. Let's be real. The Democrats and Republicans are both full of prohibitionists on the East Coast. In New Jersey, bids to legalize cannabis for adult use failed, with lawmakers suggesting they might advance the issue through a referendum for voters to decide on next year. You know what that means? A referendum is, hey, should we legalize marijuana? And the voters say yes. And then you have another year to drag your feet and have an excuse that the following year as to why you didn't do it. Referendums are bullshit. We already do polling. If polling isn't accurate, then why do we rely on it and let the media run away with it and develop narratives with it? We shouldn't. It should be kind of like the same way you determine if the weather's good by licking your finger and sticking it up in the air. Pennsylvania lawmakers discussed a legalization plan during a joint Senate and House Democratic Policy Committee in April, but that didn't materialize either. However, following the listening tour with the backing of Wolf, a comprehensive piece of legalization legislation that was introduced on Tuesday is believed to stand a better chance. And this was a month ago, and it ain't happening, and it won't happen, and it's not going to happen because they all wanted to get together and tell you that it's going to happen. It's just not happening. The East Coast will never legalize marijuana until the whole country does. I'm pretty sure. In Virginia, West Virginia, the Carolinas, I consider at least North Carolina to be East Coast too, rather than down south or whatever. All those states weren't even included in that little meeting of the East Coast that still hasn't legalized marijuana. There's still a couple more that I can think of that haven't done it. And as if it wasn't all we were heading towards this era where you could honestly say that we no longer believe in this whole Nancy Reagan drug war bullshit, and that it is just a war on people, specifically minorities, and specifically poor minorities. During all this great momentum that we have, where we have politicians literally talking about ending the drug war and legalizing all drugs and legalizing psychedelics from coast to coast, when the whole world is feeling like this, when you hear bodies like the United Nations and the World Health Organization, you know, corrupt as they all may be, when you hear them start talking about, well, maybe legalization is the way to go. In the face of all of this, the U.S. Postal Service unveils a drug-free USA Forever stamp commemorating the 1980s anti-drug program. And like everything else that the post office makes commemorative stamps for, hopefully that means that this is the final brush into the dustbin of the memory of history. And again, this is Kyle Yeager, and I can't believe I'll have to read this much, but it's this telling, man, how stupid this country is sometimes. The U.S. Postal Service is rolling out a new stamp design that pays tribute to the 1980s era drug prevention programs and promotes a drug-free USA. The stamp, which will go on sale starting in October 2020, were announced on the concession of this year's Red Ribbon Week last month, an annual occurrence first launched under the Reagan administration. The drug-free USA Forever stamp will help further raise awareness about the dangers of drug abuse and the toll it's taking on the families and communities around the country, Robert Duncan, chairman of the USPS Board of Governors, said in a press release. And it seems to me like they could have better things to spend their time and money on than putting out stupid stamps like this. But whatever, you know, that's what they do. The Postal Service is glad to do its part by marking Red Ribbon Week to renewing our commitment to helping these efforts to educate youth in the dangers of illegal drugs. And I have to say that the only people that still use stamps are those old boomers that still want drugs to be illegal. So you at least found a niche market for your new product. USPS explains that Red Ribbon Week originated after DEA administration agent was tortured and killed in Mexico while investigating drug traffickers in 1985. And I say to that, why are we in Mexico investigating drug trafficking? That doesn't really sound like, you know, that sounds like a pretty dangerous endeavor, all right? And the reason it is so dangerous is because the prohibition of drugs in America has turned Mexico into the most brutal, crazy place there is, because it's run by essentially drug gangs. And that's our fault, because we're the #1 consumers of all those drugs that have to get across Mexico to get here from South America. Quote, I am very pleased that the U.S. Postal Service will issue a stamp affirming our commitment to a drug-free America. DEA Acting Administrator Udom Dillon said, quote, this stamp will help raise awareness of the fight against drug addiction and honor those who have been dedicated their lives to that cause. Now the thing is it's a stupid way to frame their job, which is not trying to get to a drug-free America. And we've seen the DEA just do completely antithetical, you know, actions. And I mean, I'm gonna go out on a limb and hope that my troll that always barks back when I bring it up don't try to act like you know what you're talking about. But the DEA literally was involved in at least letting it happen when the CIA was running drugs into the country. We know that. That's a fact. So everything else after that is totally off the table bullshit. This drug war is a completely illegal, unconstitutional manifestation on this country that needs to... It's draining law enforcement resources. It's churning law enforcement agencies into militarized brutality. You know, Gestapo. I got no other words. And there's no such thing as a drug-free America. There never will be. We allow people to drink booze. Cigarettes are still huge. They still kill lots of people too. I don't see you guys arresting the people at Big Tobacco for murder. USPS isn't applying anti-drug messaging to the cannabis component CBD anymore. However, in September, the agency clarified that the hemp-derived CBD products can be mailed under certain circumstances since the crop and its derivatives were federally legalized under the 2018 Farm Bill. For those with mailing needs who aren't interested in supporting the notion of a drug-free USA, USPS does have another stamp that recognizes the 50-year anniversary of the drug-fueled 1969 counterculture music festival Woodstock. And that's a good way to commemorate a 50-year anniversary of a festival right there. A stamp, not a 50-year anniversary festival. If anybody knows anything about that attempt, it was a fabulous disaster. And finally, another option is the John Lennon Forever stamp, celebrating the iconic Beatles member and a marijuana enthusiast who famously got high with a little help from his friends and pretty much got John Sinclair out of prison. As we talk more about the loosening of the stigma around drugs, there's been, this kind of eye on the Schedule 1 drugs as of late, especially the psychedelics, in terms of their ability to aid in all kinds of work, we'll call it, with people and their mental afflictions, quite frankly. So we've had research being granted for things like MDMA and psilocybin in terms of trying to help people with, whatever problems they may have. And we've seen experiments where they use these things to help people quit addiction and get through PTSD. Now we have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez voicing support for decriminalizing psychedelics. And real quick, I think this video is really short, so we'll just go ahead and watch the video. But, the byline is, AOC called for decriminalizing the use and research on psychedelics, as well as the comprehensive marijuana legalization, and a video message played for the Drug Policy Reform Conference on Thursday. And this is kind of old, 2 weeks ago. At the opening plenary of the International Drug Policy Reform Conference, organizers played the video in which the congressman offered a welcome and voiced support for the reforms that advocates participating in the event are fighting for.
Hi everyone, this is Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez coming at you here from Washington, D.C. I just wanted to give you all a big, wide welcome to the International Drug Policy Reform Conference in St. Louis, Missouri. I'm so sorry I can't be there with you in person, but I am so encouraged and glad that all of you are here and know that we are fighting shoulder to shoulder in the fight to not only decriminalize marijuana, to not only legalize marijuana, but to do so in a way that is just, that is humane, that doesn't exacerbate so many of the injustices from the war on drugs, and to make sure that we're also addressing policy at a much wider and broader level so that working families across the country are no longer criminalized, and that we're not treating marijuana and other drug issues as criminal justice issues, but that we're treating them as public health issues. And so for that, I'm very thankful to have been working with the Drug Policy Alliance throughout this year to introduce and work on several different amendments and pieces of legislation to make our lives better. And that includes things like moving money out of the DEA and into overdose treatment programs, as well as really examining some of the ways that we can also decriminalize the use and study of psychedelic compounds for medicinal applications and future policy. So I'm so excited. Thank you for being part of this conversation. There's no way that we could do it without everyone at the table, and to make sure that we do it justly so that communities of color are not left behind. So we thank you again, and let's get to it.
So I appreciate very much that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez cares enough about this issue to even make this video and feel bad that she couldn't make it to the conference, was talking with Marijuana Policy Project personnel about these issues, because in my opinion, or in my, in all my years, this is not something that happens very often, if not ever, especially when talking about psychedelics. Like I said, this whole psychedelics thing is all new. This fight probably just kind of sprang up as a next obvious salvo in ending the drug war bit by bit. Obviously, marijuana, we know that's not dangerous or addictive. We know there's reasons why they have psychedelics illegal that has nothing to do with safety or public safety or individual safety or the collective. It's just a matter of what these drugs that expand your consciousness are capable of doing. And basically, it's good to have somebody, on our side on this one. It's really rare, and thank you again. I don't know what else to say. So we had this 10-year challenge. Oh no. The link I wanted is not there. But basically, 10 years ago in 2009, and I thought, here's Tom Angel putting that out. I don't know if he did the actual that thing I seen earlier, but I seen an actual meme, and it said, 0 states legal in 2009 and 11 legal today, plus D.C. More on D.C. later. Speaking of AOC, just a week ago, she called for the decriminalization of all drugs, joining a small number of people in the government that have said this. Beto O'Rourke might have murmured it when he was running for Senate, but when he was running for president, not so much, and I haven't heard him say it lately. Pete Buttigieg kind of alluded to ending the drug war, which would mean decriminalizing all drugs. And even, maybe we'll get into those other guys in here, but Andrew Yang saying that we should decriminalize opiates, or, legalize them, legalize and regulate. Rep. AOC voiced support for decriminalizing the use of all drugs on Sunday. The freshman congresswoman tweeted that drug criminalization as well as marijuana legalization are matters of public health. So you couldn't agree more. I mean, the criminalization of drugs is already weird, because if you say that the government is interested in public health and safety, arresting somebody for what is pretty much tantamount to a health problem is a little weird, And it isn't criminal until you say, hey, possession of this thing right here is illegal, and now it's criminal. That's the only way it's criminal. It doesn't. Usually criminality is determined because it affects somebody else's life, So this marks a development in AOC's drug policy platform. Previously, she called for the decriminalization and use of and research of psychedelics, emphasizing the therapeutic potential of the substances. To that end, she introduced an amendment to a spending bill in June that would remove a rider that the advocates argue has inhibited research into the potential therapeutic benefits of Schedule I drugs such as psilocybin and LSD. The House rejected that measure in a floor vote, however. Boo. And the House is the Democrats. So the Democrats rejected her add-on that would basically remove the rider on the spending bill. AOC recently gave her endorsement to Senator Bernie Sanders, but while the senator was the first major presidential candidate to back marijuana legalization during his 2016 run, he said this year that he's not there yet on broader drug decriminalization. It's not clear if the Congresswoman's role as a surrogate on his campaign will ultimately influence him to adopt the policy. But as more candidates debate the best way forward on various drug reform proposals, with cannabis legalization being a given for almost all contenders, former Vice President Joe Biden remains several paces behind. He opposes adult use legalization and said on Saturday that marijuana may be a gateway to other more dangerous substances. And we know that's bullshit. I talked way too much, if not enough, about that in my other videos. Groups push Congress to let D.C. legalize marijuana sales. Kyle Yeager, once again, marijuana moment. And DC legalized marijuana in 2014, still can't sell it. Oh, man. So more than a dozen advocacy organizations sent a letter to House and Senate leadership on Wednesday urging them to allow Washington, D.C. to implement and regulate marijuana market. While D.C. voters approved an initiative legalizing low-level possession and home cultivation of cannabis in 2014, congressional lawmakers have attached riders to spending legislation each year since that have blocked officials in the nation's capital from using local tax dollars to enact a retail sales component. Quote, it is critical that Congress supports D.C.'s right to home rule and ability to spend local tax dollars as they deem fit, especially in regard to the regulation and taxation of marijuana. The groups, including Drug Policy Alliance, ACLU of D.C., NORML, and Competitive Enterprise Institute, wrote. And I'm going to add to that, it's just absurd that the federal government has the ability to neuter a local government for being able to do what they want to do and what their people, well, majority of the voters and everything, anybody you ask on the street would want to see done. And it's just a matter of acting like, they're not legitimately in control of their own affairs. They have this overarching power presence that won't let them do it. It's bad. This is not this has been going on for 5 years now. In its latest spending bill for fiscal year 2020, the House Appropriations Committee stripped the rider from the chamber's version of the legislation, and Representative Andy Harris, a Republican from Maryland who has sponsored the measure in years past, didn't attempt to reinsert it this time. The bill passed the House in June. Current law has interfered with the district's effort to regulate marijuana, which has impacted public safety, the reform group's letter states. Quote, without the ability to regulate marijuana sales, the gray market for marijuana flourishes despite the need and want of the district leadership and residents alike to establish a regulatory model. Such a model would free up law enforcement resources to focus on reducing violent crimes, it continues. It would also allow legitimate entrepreneurs to start businesses, create jobs, and spur economic development. And 17 organizations total sent the letter to Congress. It's pretty absurd, man, that's what's going on. I've been having trouble with Twitter today. I don't know why. Sorry about that. But, let them do their thing, man. Like, what is the deal? That's 5 years. 5 years. So you might have seen the memes, or if you live in South Dakota, you might even have seen the commercials. It's the good old Meth, I'm on it campaign. And this is a pretty expensive ad campaign. Anytime the government puts out PSAs, you better believe that shit costs a lot of money. Way more than your small business was going to try to get a message out there. They're not going to spend the kind of money these guys spend. South Dakota is not only losing the war on drugs. Oh, and by the way, this is just an op-ed from the Argus Leader editorial board. So somebody wrote this and the whole board agreed on it. And I got to say, I'm going to read it. There's some things I agree with, some things I don't agree with, but I'm just going to rip right through it. I don't think I'm going to stop, but let's do it anyway. South Dakota is not only losing the war on drugs, it's setting a standard for ineptitude. After years of being held up as an example of flawed enforcement policy and overzealous sentencing of nonviolent narcotic offenders, we've entered a fresh wave of national scrutiny, this time in the form of laughter. Governor Kristi Noem's anti-meth advertising campaign featured the tagline, "Meth, we're on it," managed to draw enough mockery to make South Dakota a trending topic on Twitter, with national media and neighboring states seizing the hackened attempt at double meaning to the unthinkable, make a joke out of a crippling drug addiction. And yeah, come on. Enough about the punchlines, though. Let's talk about missed opportunities and wasted resources. This was the rollout of a $1.4 million ad campaign contracted by the state's Department of Social Services to a Minneapolis marketing firm, which will use various forms of media to educate every person across the state of South Dakota on meth addiction, resources available, and strategies to engage communities in recovery. For that amount of money and the importance of the subject matter, there should be scrutiny upon those who gained off the premise. Someone listened to a boardroom pitch that most Americans found harebrained and decided to invest state funds to embrace the "I'm on meth" mantra. Since Noam is the boss, she has some explaining to do. We all understand the advertising axiom of just get them talking about you, which the governor tried to use as cover for her blunder. That approach makes perfect sense for commercial branding, but this was not about selling breakfast cereal. This is about raising awareness and fostering grassroots education about a highly addictive drug that accounted for more than 3,600 statewide arrests in 2018 and has reached crisis mode on Native American reservations. The trend is seeping into our schools, with South Dakota reporting a 150% higher rate of young meth users than the rest of the country. There is a difference between getting people's attention for a 2-day news cycle and those same people being suitably inspired to take meaningful steps to understand and address the issue. Research into Just Say No PSAs and other anti-drug campaigns in the 80s and 90s show little positive effect on their core audience, namely young people who have not yet become habitual users. Though they drew attention with images such as an egg in the frying pan and a message, "This is your brain on drugs," the movement missed the mark. Despite billions of dollars spent, former President Drug Policy Advisor Keith Humphrey told NPR in 2017, the general consensus is that these ads either had no effect in some cases, or maybe even the perverse effect. I would have called it the opposite effect, because that's what it did. Just say no. Come on, how many people have you seen at a rave party with a Just Say No shirt on? Perhaps the money could be better spent on a whole network of support systems to help parents and educators understand warning signs and behavioral triggers before things start to spiral. Hardcore drug use is often a symptom of emotional vulnerabilities and social circumstances that trained counselors can not only spot but also work with others to counteract. I always say, if you really want your population to not be completely addicted to drugs, hardcore meth and heroin, give them something, man. Like, there isn't nothing out there. There's no jobs. There's nothing to do if you even have money. And it's basically just boring. And if you want to just underscore that, just South Dakota. I mean, I'm sorry. Try to drive through there sometime. You'll see what I'm talking about. If South Dakota's ad campaign is merely a way to draw people to a website to find such resources, it could have been done with a much smaller price tag and considerably less embarrassment. It also is a mixed message for a state that ranks first nationally per capita in narcotics arrests, the byproduct of a system in which stiff drug laws swell jails and prisons with low-level offenders. South Dakota is the only state that treats ingestion of a controlled substance as a felony rather than a misdemeanor, which helps fuel the incarceration rate rather than focus on addiction counseling and continuing treatment. And, for real, though, what's the numbers doing? The numbers are this. The numbers of people getting arrested for drugs are going up. The numbers of, people that are doing crimes and stuff like that are going up. So I don't understand how you think that every year the number of people getting arrested for drugs goes up. How is that showing any results that tell you to keep doing it? It's not. It is just not. A legislative committee that studied the issue over summer recommended more funding for probation, parole, and treatment services, but no change to South Dakota's ingestion law. So that's ridiculous. A state facing an epidemic of meth and opioid abuse, coupled with laws that lock up common users and encourage recidivism, has decided that minor tweaks to the status quo and a too clever ad campaign is the way to find daylight amid the darkness. Do we need to keep hammering this issue until leadership emerges and common sense prevails? I hope so, because, man, I've been screaming about all this stuff my whole life, man. Like, the whole drug war is just this. It's just bullshit. And I was a kid. I was a teenager and a younger than that when when Nancy Reagan's ridiculous just say no bullshit hit the airwaves and the this is your brain on drug commercial. Yeah, I must have seen that thing thousands of times while trying to watch Batman and Incredible Hulk while I was growing up. Between games of Pac-Man and Pong, you know. So, South Dakota's marijuana activists churn in more than enough signatures for 2020 ballot questions, which is good news, I guess, you know, since they're leading the way in new method addicts and heroin deaths are spiking. Yeah. South Dakota residents will likely get the chance to vote on 2 different marijuana initiatives during next year's election. Thanks again to Kyle Yeager over at Marijuana Moment that we have this story. On Monday, advocates submitted more than 50,000 signatures for a proposed constitutional ballot measure to legalize cannabis for adult use, which is being sponsored by former federal prosecutor, and more than 30,000 signatures for a separate statutory initiative seeking to establish medical marijuana program in the state. South Dakota's Secretary of State will now review the signatures. Constitutional initiatives require 33,921 valid signatures, while statutory measures need 16,961. So the reform campaigns collected significantly more than needed, bolstering the chances that they will qualify for the 2020 ballot, even if a sizable portion end up getting thrown out. And we've seen these throwaways before. We've seen the throwaways go into a recount before. We've seen the throwaways have no justification for throwing away a bunch. We've seen the throwaways throw away as many as they could, still didn't throw away enough because there was enough to still get on, and they still didn't let it on. We've seen all that happen since 2016. And 2014, actually. I'm rewinding it back to 2014. Ballot initiatives are golden. It's the way that marijuana has been getting legalized. All right? Only 2 states out of the 11 did it without the ballot initiatives. And, you know, they're still kind of working out the kinks of their state written marijuana law. When you do these ballot initiatives, you start out with what the people want or closer to it. Usually the ballot initiatives get kind of watered down by outside groups that have the capital to get the job done. So it's almost like you have to go with them, and next thing you know it, you got a little bit of that corporate takeover in your plan. But anyway, all this aside, this is still good news. Both measures are being backed by national advocacy groups like Marijuana Policy Project and New Approach PAC. MPP is involved in multiple ballot campaigns to change cannabis laws at the state level in 2020, including in Mississippi, Montana, and Nebraska. So throw South Dakota in there, and you have some of the most prohibitive states in the drug war. Right there. Montana, Nebraska, Mississippi, and South Dakota. They're pretty scary if you look at the actual penalties and laws. Okay, quote, across country voters are recognizing that it makes no sense to waste law enforcement resources on arresting adults for marijuana possession, and it also makes no sense to force marijuana sales into the unregulated illicit market. MPP Deputy Director Matthew Schweik said in a press release. Simply put, legalizing, regulating, and taxing marijuana is the public policy decision that best serves the interests of the public health and public safety. Brendan Johnson, a former U.S. attorney behind the adult use legalization initiative, said his group is proud to have submitted petitions on behalf of over 80,000 South Dakotans who believe that voters should decide our state's marijuana and hemp laws. And that's pretty cool that we have this guy, Brendan Johnson, who's a former U.S. attorney. So I don't know much about him, but if you were a U.S. attorney in that corner of the country, then you had a lot of work on marijuana busts in your tenure. So yeah, it's good to see people like that. I guess it's like Kamala Harris out there, putting in legalizing marijuana bills and talking about how we need to legalize marijuana. It's because of the guilt that they feel after all that enforcement and ruining people's lives and destroying families and basically watching neighborhoods just disappear because you this ridiculous drug war. Under the measure, adults 21 and older would be able to possess and distribute up to 1 ounce of marijuana. They could also cultivate up to 3 cannabis plants for personal use. It would also direct the legislature to establish medical cannabis and industrial hemp programs in the state. So what I like to do with ballot initiatives is kind of track them over time. And if you do that, what you find is the older you go back, like ballot initiatives that were written in the 80s and the 70s and the 90s, they just keep getting more and more favorable to corporate marijuana existing. Let's just say that. So now they want to have you growing less plants and being able to possess less weed so that anybody doing anything bigger than that. I mean, 3 plants is absurd. I guess you could get away with 3 plants being good for personal, but it's not going to be enough for me. It's not going to be enough for my medicine. The separate medical cannabis focused proposal would allow patients with debilitating medical conditions to possess and purchase up to 3 ounces of marijuana from a licensed dispensary. They could also grow at least 3 plants or more if authorized by a physician. All right. Here they are taking the signatures in. Always a good ceremony to watch. It's where the will of the people meets the office where you have to hand it over, because it seems like the people that you're trying to get to do this for so long. I mean, this is South Dakota, let's be real. I don't know how much, if any, there ever was anybody petitioning the Congress or the governor in that state ever to legalize marijuana, or if there was ever any activists that were in the government. I don't know. I don't know much about South Dakota's history, and if there even is one, I have not heard about it. I've never even heard of anything going on as far as legalizing measures are concerned in South Dakota, but best of luck to you guys. The initiatives will likely face pushback from certain corners. Governor Kristi Noem vetoed a hemp legalization bill in March, and the state's Republican Party actively implored residents not to sign ballot petitions when they are circulated in September. Wow. So that's what your Republicans are like. They're like telling residents not to sign ballot petitions. That's pretty shady. Also shady, though, is Governor Kristi Noem, who has no problem giving $1.5 million to her buddies to make an ad campaign telling you how everybody in South Dakota is on meth. But when it comes to marijuana policy or their ridiculous policy of arresting you with a felony just for possession, yeah, I think the bitch has got to go. It's ridiculous. How much more corruption do you want to see right in front of you before you say this has to stop? You vetoed a hemp legalization bill in March. By then, we already knew that the federal government was going to be descheduling hemp and getting the rules for hemp to be made by the USDA, and states all across the country have ranged from getting looked at by acreage holdings to having a full-blown hemp program going for years. We've seen Colorado emerge as one of the biggest hemp producers in the country. So what are you thinking? Vetoing a hemp legalization bill. That's in 2019. That is authoritarian, boot-stomping, Gestapo bullshit. Period. And if you live in that state, you should be writing a pissed-off, angry letter to this fucking governor right now as I'm speaking. All right, Kyle Yeager again. New Mexico committee gets a head start on marijuana legalization for the 2020 session. So here we go, another state talking about it, because I don't know if they have a ballot. See, a lot of the times you can't do a ballot initiative in your state simply because your state has rules that say you can't do it. And I'm not sure if New Mexico is one of those or not. But even if they weren't, or especially if they are, what I do know is wherever there is ballot initiatives allowed, the government is scrambling around either out in the open or behind closed doors talking about legalizing marijuana, because believe me, like I said earlier, the ballot initiatives, they might be getting more and more favorable to corporate marijuana existing and all that stuff, but what they definitely, don't do is they don't look anywhere near as bad as what states would hammer out and say, these are the rules. I guarantee it, because every one of these state houses is corrupt as hell by people that want to take over the marijuana industry. So New Mexico is no different. New Mexico lawmakers discussed the potential economic impact of legalizing marijuana in the state during a committee hearing on Wednesday. The meeting of the legislature's Interim Economic and Rural Development Committee, which featured testimony from the chair of the governor-appointed cannabis working group, focused on issues such as tax scheme for legal marijuana sales and allocation of resulting revenue. As usual. It's always about the money that they get, and what they can do with it. While and it's funny because they sit there in glee over giving billionaires tax cuts. But when they're looking at marijuana taxes and they sit there and start salivating, they start talking about giving it to the cops and, paying for drug education and stuff that we already said didn't work in the last video. All right. So while Pat Davis, the working group chair, touted the economic potential of the industry, he also recognized that, quote, getting a business in marijuana is expensive. It costs about $500,000 to $1 million to open. Given that, he said it was important to use revenue from cannabis sales to start a venture capital fund that could provide low-interest loans to disadvantaged communities to launch marijuana operations. That is a little bit better of a method to try to work your way towards equity, but it's still a little bit weird. If you just... So the problem that getting a marijuana business cost $1 million to open, that's the problem. Not getting the fucking money together so somebody can do it. The problem is that it cost a fucking $1 million to do. It shouldn't cost $1 million to open any business. Period. Especially a weed business. Weed is something that gets a fucking weed that grows on the ground. It'll grow perfectly fine between two fucking cracks in the concrete. And you're telling me it cost $1 million to pick that thing and sell it to somebody? You got to be fucking insane if you think that that's the right thing to do. Is like, oh, since it cost $1 million, the problem is we got to get money to poor people so that they can do it. No, you got to fucking take that $1 million down. It don't cost no $1 million to start a marijuana business. And by the way, there's also hemp. There's so many products that you can make from this plant that I would turn blue in the face if I even named, 1/1000th of them. So no, you don't need $1 million to start a business, especially a weed business. That's because of the corruption. We got to fight that. We got to get rid of the fact that it costs $1.5 million to open a marijuana business. That's absurd. I don't know if he's specifically talking about a giant warehouse that grows weed, but that don't even need to exist. If you're talking about this helping low-income people and equity in the ownership of the marketplace, then we could, instead of 10 of those big fucking factory farms that cost $1 million to pop off, you can open hundreds of small businesses that can do way better work than those big factory farms. That's where I'm at. That's where I've always been. And I'm so sick of this shit when people start talking about, oh, well, we can help the people that were affected the most by getting grants and loans to them. Why should we? Why can't we just legalize what they're doing? They're already doing it. Anyway, I get a little heated when I realize that most of the people that are trying to, help the business and the marijuana legalization become normalized are just profiteers. They're just cutthroat capitalists like any other business. And are we going to eventually get stomped out by them? Probably. I mean, it seems pretty likely. I just want to go to that Vice magazine. I'm going to do a separate video about that. I'm just going to watch the whole video and critique it like I used to do. But we're not going to do that today on this video. In March, the House approved a bill that would legalize marijuana and provide sales to be conducted primarily through state-run stores. A Senate committee advanced that bill, but it later stalled before it reached a floor vote in the chamber. The Cannabis Working Group said in September that it opposed a government-run marijuana model. And yeah, of course. And isn't this in we're talking about New Mexico? Isn't that like a Republican place? I feel like it's very Republican. And isn't Republicans, they're always like, hey, the government can't do it good. You got to let the people do that. So why would you have a government-run plan? That just sounds real shady. So Senate President Mary Kay Pappen, Democrat, said this week that she is not really enthusiastic about legalization legislation, but remains open to the possibility, the Associated Press reported. And of course, and that's the Democrat. So it's a pretty right-wing spot when the Democrat who's the Senate president isn't very excited about the prospect of legalizing. Also this year, the legislature passed a bill decriminalizing cannabis possession, which was signed into law by the governor in April and officially took effect on July. So that's good, hopefully. And moving along, so here we have a couple of stories in California by Kyle Yeager about this activist ballot measure to legalize psilocybin mushrooms. Activists filed a proposed ballot measure last week that seeks to legalize the possession, cultivation, and retail sale of psilocybin mushrooms in California. Decriminalize California, the group behind the petition, previously filed a narrower initiative to decriminalize the psychedelics statewide. But now they're requesting a ballot title and summary for a new, more expansive proposal that also includes an relief for people who have previously been convicted of offenses involving psilocybin. In a letter to the state's attorney, Decriminalize California campaign manager Ryan Manover wrote that the group, quote, would like to continue the process for the original model as well so that both versions are options for us to use. Manover told Marijuana Moment in a phone interview that the group's members, quote, got stuck in the question of sales and distribution and what that really meant, and ended up debating the pros and cons of the broader approach compared to a more narrowly tailored decriminalization measure. At first, the group's logic was that they, quote, didn't necessarily want to decriminalize sales yet because we wanted things to get figured out and settled down. And I say to that, it's a double-edged sword, because if you don't put the regulations in there, then all of a sudden the people that have the jails and the cop cars and shit decide that, oh, you know what, you didn't say sales were legal, so if anyone gets caught selling, we're still going to get you. But ultimately realizing that people would continue to be prosecuted if their initiative omitted sales component, and simultaneously seeing widespread enthusiasm among the rank and file for expanding the proposal, Decriminalize California opted to file the broader measure. So basically, if it don't pass, people might bitch later like, oh, you could have had them both on there. So it was like, okay, we don't want sales legalized, but we do want possession legalized or whatever. And it's like, that's cool, but it's not enough, like he said. And later down the line, they would bust you still for selling it. Or even if you had some on you, they would say you're selling it. So the latest version of the California Psilocybin Decriminalization Initiative, quote, advances cognitive liberty and implements a comprehensive statewide scheme authorizing and regulating the cultivation, processing, and distribution of psilocybin mushrooms and the chemical compounds contained therein for personal, spiritual, religious, dietary, therapeutic, and medical use, the measure says. And this, like I said earlier, this sounds like what marijuana ballot initiatives sounded like back in the 70s. You know, like, hey, this should just be legalized, you know, for these following uses. And it's like you can't really argue it, and it goes back to the, you know, the pursuit of happiness argument. So beyond legalizing retail sales and cultivation, the proposal would also allow for on-site social consumption facilities for the mushrooms to be sold at farmers markets. The California Department of Food and Agriculture would be responsible for regulating the psilocybin market, imposing fees and taxes on psychedelic businesses, and ensuring that edible products are properly labeled. Taxes couldn't be levied on the sale of psilocybin for religious, therapeutic, or medical purposes. But if you're using them for personal or dietary, then yes. Anyway, the state would also have to allow for clinical research into psilocybin, and licensed medical professionals could use the mushrooms for research and treatment purposes. Quote, I imagine there's going to be a large-scale pharmaceutical companies that are going to keep making designer organisms that basically excrete psilocybin and psilocin and other components if the measure passes, Manover said. Those who are serving time in prison for psilocybin offenses made legal under the measure would be allowed to petition the court for dismissal or resentencing. Those who have already served time for such conviction could petition for their record to be sealed or redesignated as a misdemeanor or infraction. Advocates would need to collect 623,212 valid signatures from registered voters to qualify the initiative for the 2020 ballot. If they do so and the psilocybin legalization measure is approved by voters, the state agricultural department would have to issue licenses by September 20th, 2021. Oregon activists are also pushing for psilocybin legalization, but the measure being circulated there would only allow people to receive psilocybin treatment for therapeutical purposes at a licensed facility and would not authorize broader commercial sales. And also coming out of California is this one. Santa Cruz will consider decriminalizing psychedelics this week. And, gee, I guess I could have got an update on that one, huh? That was 2 weeks ago. We'll get an update on that. I'll talk about it when I find out. Let me see. Actually, was this updated? Oops. We don't have any updates. Yeah, it's the last update, man. Yeah, that's the last update I got. Santa Cruz will be the latest in the wave of cities to decriminalize psychedelics, with a city council hearing on the proposals scheduled for Tuesday. The city's mayor, Justin Cummings, recently introduced the resolutions which would make possession, use, and cultivation of the entheogenic substances such as psilocybin mushrooms and ayahuasca the city's lowest law enforcement priority. And that is exactly what I meant when I said that what did Cory Booker do when he was mayor of Newark? And somebody in the comment section was like, what can a mayor really do? Well, this is it right here. This is what the mayor can do. The mayor sets the agenda. That's like what the president's job is. They don't really actually write laws and shit like that, but once in a while, when they're setting an agenda, they might. And he introduced the resolution. You know? Just like the mayor, I can't remember where that was, but I think it was Oakland or San Francisco. But a couple years ago, the mayor issued a moratorium on cannabis arrests, and the prosecutor said that we're not going to push any more cannabis cases through. So you can do shit like that if you're a mayor. Anyway, quote, plants and fungi with psychedelic properties have been used for thousands of years by indigenous communities for spiritual and medical practices, and many are considered illegal in our country, Cummings told Marijuana Moment in an email. Quote, as we begin to better understand the health benefits of these plants and fungi, we are to not treat the people who use and research these plants as criminals. The lower barriers for research, clinical treatment, and personal. If approved, the City Council, quote, supports the possession, use, and or cultivation of entheogenic psychoactive plants and fungi for personal adult use and clinical research in psychoactive practices, and declares that the investigation and arrest of individuals involved with the adult possession, use, or cultivation of these plants and fungi listed on the federal Schedule 1 list for personal use being among the lowest priorities for the city of Santa Cruz. The measure recommended that the use of psychedelics for medical or spiritual purposes, quote, be done in consultation with or under the supervision of trained medical professionals. Additionally, it calls on a city manager to order Santa Cruz's state and federal lobbyists to, quote, work in support of decriminalizing all entheogenic psychoactive plants and plant and fungi-based compounds listed in the Federal Controlled Substances Act. Advocates are also working to advance decriminalization in Portland, Chicago, Berkeley, and Dallas. Good luck, all of you, with all of that. In other news, the FDA's former chief, who we all love to hate, Scott Gottlieb, he just won't go away. He's kind of like Hillary. He just won't fucking go away. Whether he's talking about vaping or kratom or CBD or THC or whole plant marijuana, this fucking guy just won't leave the conversation. He just has to pop his head in there and be there. Why? Well, it wasn't enough for him to sit on one pharmaceutical board or two. He had to sit on 8. And after that, he had to be working for the FDA until he was head of that. The revolving door didn't stop there. Now he's a consultant on TV or wherever else you can find him, telling us how to run our country. Telling the people that aren't even elected but tell us what to do. Because let's face it, he's never been anywhere where he was wanted by people that have to vote, and, you know, like the government's who we vote for. We don't vote for assholes like this. He just pops up whenever he feels like it and starts working on some shit that fucks everything up. Former FDA, what is he doing now? He wants the federal government to regulate state marijuana markets. Really? How could you have done that when you were in charge of the FDA? Let me think. Oh, you could have fucking descheduled marijuana and set up some kind of marijuana agency like the ATF and done that. You could have done that already. He could have tried to do Schedule 2, which he did mention during his time at the FDA, that would be a possible path forward, but he wasn't really a big fan of that even. But when it comes to, you know, the federal government regulating state markets, that's simple. You deschedule it and you give it to a fucking agency in the federal government to do just that. Like what the USDA is doing to hemp. This guy, man, he just gets under my skin. He's the former, but he said on Monday that the federal government should regulate state markets. In his clearest comments on the issue to date, Gottlieb said in a CNBC appearance that the rise in vaping-related lung injuries underscores the need for federal regulatory scheme that would empower agencies to impose industry standards on aspects of legal cannabis markets, such as the THC potency and allowable forms of consumption. No thanks. We just want a clean deschedule, and then you guys fuck right off all the way. That would be great. But besides that, when you're talking about this vaping thing being convoluted with tobacco vaping and marijuana vaping, homemade vapes versus commercially made carts, bootleg Chinese counterfeit shit, all that shit, he's right. The federal government needs to be involved in the regulation of all those things to a certain degree. To the degree that We know this is A is this, B is that. Orange is the color orange. Up is up and down is down. That's all we need from you guys. We don't need you to do all this over the top other shit like worrying about THC potency and CBD plants and stuff. Just ridiculous oversights. They're trying to neuter the industry at every step, and this is just him telling people how to do it. And while he's out here making noise about this, there is people in the FDA. Sorry about my congestion today. Jeez. He's doing this, and people are chirping. They're like repeating what he's saying. And I kind of agree that when you got this vaping stuff going on, everybody's blaming weed for it, or they bring this talking point up like it's the weed vape giving the tobacco vaping a bad name. And really, it's just that nobody's regulating this shit that good. Nobody's acting like we have to. It took them like a month to figure out the actual thing in the e-carts that were making people sick. And believe me, it probably will take longer than a month for them to get that shit out of the carts. So ask whether states are capable of providing the type of regulation he's calling for. Gottlieb said no because there's a patchwork of policies across the country and states that, quote, don't have the capacity to both police what's being sold in their so-called legal dispensary as well as shut down the black market. Quote, I think you're going to need federal authorities in there to do that. And it's funny you say that because the federal government can just go in there and shut it right down. So you're saying that they never did that because they wanted the opportunity to go in there and just take it over once it got up and running? Because that's what it sounds like you're saying. And I say no thanks to that either, buddy. And you're going to have just as much luck shutting down black markets and establishing good policies and establishing what legal dispensaries are working with, and you're gonna have just as much luck as the next guy down the rung on the ladder, dude. Let's face it, you guys couldn't control any of those things when it was 100% illegal. What do you think you can do now? You got the paper and pen on your side now instead of the gun and the badge, and you think you can do more damage with that shit than you did with the gun and the badge? I welcome the fucking fight. Under the regulatory model, Gottlieb is envisioning FDA and other agencies, such as the drug enforcement agencies, could regulate, Drug Enforcement Administration, could regulate what's being sold for the potency, for the manufacturing, for the ingredients, for the claims that are being made. And it's all a big bunch of no fucking thanks, dude. You guys had one job and one tool only. You had a job of locking people up, and the only tool you had with the drug war was a gun and a badge. And now you want to turn those people into like nuanced parts of the marketplace that know what's going on. It's absurd. And we're already seeing them trying to do this with the USDA telling, hemp farmers that they have to go to a DEA certified lab to test their shit. No, they don't. We don't want that. We don't need that. Those guys weren't there to do good things ever. They were just there to fuck us over. And why would we ever trust them? And then they come out with these rules like that because they don't trust us. They don't trust that you're going to grow a hemp crop without having some marijuana in there, buddy. Oh, it's so annoying that this is going on, man. Quote, even if we were to federalize it and allow some form of recreational use, we could limit what could be sold, the potency of what could be sold, the forms which could be sold, he said, adding that he doesn't think that vaping THC products should be allowed. And in this guy's world, like I said, nothing should be allowed recreationally. This guy's a strict 100% big pharma tool. To him, we should probably go back to like no recreational and drug test the whole country like that one guy wants to do. Scott, no thanks, dude. That's all I got for you is a big fat sandwich with a no thanks written all over it. We don't want to federalize it. We want the federal government to not have anything at all to do with it. End of story. There's a way to have a comprehensive where you allow for some form of recreational access in the states that will want to allow it but that's something that looks different, far different than what you have today, something that's far less permissive than the state laws. He said, that's not a great outcome in my view from a public health standpoint, but what we have now is far worse, where you have a federal government not enforcing the law at all, barely enforcing the law because they know the existing law isn't practical, and states not imposing any supervision because they're incapable of doing it or they don't want to step in a vigorous way, which is all unfounded, just evidence-free speculation and fear-mongering about shit that isn't even a thing. From a public health standpoint, marijuana legalization has been nothing but positive, you idiot. In every state, you're acting like the states are just doing whatever the fuck they want and they don't have any limits or rules. In your opinion, maybe because you want THC levels in recreational marijuana to be at like no more than 5% or something. You know, I can just imagine what kind of dicky shit you would be involved with these regulations you're dreaming of. Or this idea here where you're talking about, well, you know, where states that don't really want it, you can still have access to it, but something really sketchy like you got to go to this nondescript building over in some other town where nobody even lives, and you can only smoke in the fucking underground fallout shelter. You just fuck off, all right, Scott? Go away. You don't work here no more. Fucking see ya. And speaking of people that don't work here no more, former congresswoman who fought marijuana legalization joins a cannabis company board. Welcome to the club. All right. When you're talking about Canada, it's like almost every prohibitionist that ever had a fucking microphone in front of them is now a millionaire from marijuana. Same thing's happening here, guys. Same shit. It's only a matter of time before Chris Christie jumps on one of these boards and all your other prohibition, legends. Kyle Yeager, once again. Thanks, Kyle. A former GOP congressman with long track record of opposing marijuana legalization efforts is now cashing in on the legal cannabis industry. FSD Pharma, a Canadian company that is licensed producer of pharmaceutical-grade cannabis through its subsidiary FV Pharma and researches cannabinoid-based therapies, announced on Friday that former Rep. Steve Byer from Indiana joined its board of directors. I don't even got to say that he's a Republican, because there isn't really that many Democrats that are staunch opposers of legalization in memory. If you can think of one, put it in the description below so I can mention them in a video. But overall, the people that are out there making the most noise, like Chris Christie and like Steve Byer, they're always fucking Republicans. John Boehner led he showed all these other corrupt, shitty Republicans how to go from prohibition to making money, making millions off of marijuana. And I'm sure this is going to be like the floodgates are going to open, and you're going to see this happening to ad nauseum. Another reason why I'm against the corporate takeover, because it's full of prohibitionists that weren't there trying to help us legalize this shit. They were on the other side throwing rocks at us while we were fighting for this shit. Missing from the press release is the mention of his legislative history that includes repeated actions to oppose federal protections from state-level marijuana reforms. So, from 1998 to 2000, Byer co-sponsored 2 resolutions and 1 bill aimed at condemning legalization and upholding federal prohibition. His opposition extended to limited medical cannabis reforms, 2 voting 5 times from 2003 to 2007 against an amendment to protect state laws and the patients and providers complying with them from federal prosecution, or you might remember the Cole Act. They were trying to get that as an amendment, and every time it went up for a vote, at least that long ago, it wasn't the Cole Amendment then, but every time the spirit of that went up for a vote as an amendment, it got taken out. It didn't make it. 2004, I think, was when the first time it, well, never mind. Anyway, one of the anti-marijuana resolutions he signed onto passed the House but did not advance in the Senate. As introduced, it characterized cannabis as, quote, both dangerous and addictive, and stated that, quote, Congress is unequivocally opposed to legalizing marijuana for medicinal use and urges the defeat of state initiatives that would seek to legalize marijuana for medicinal use. I like how they say they're opposed to legalizing marijuana for medicinal use. It doesn't say that he's opposed to the idea that it is medicinal. The version that passed with Bayer voted for expressed concerns that ambiguous cultural messages about marijuana use are contributing to a growing acceptance of marijuana use among children and teenagers, and noted that federal authorities can enforce prohibition through seizure and other civil action as well as through criminal penalties. So, yeah, he co-sponsored this thing that sought to declare state laws and allow cannabis use as null and void. So, whatever, dude. Like, basically, it's not quite clear what changed for Bayer, but his appointment to the board of a major marijuana company that has benefited from the successful reform movement he opposed is sure to raise questions. In response to Marijuana Moment's query about what accounted for the former congressman's evolution on the issue, FSD Pharma president Zishan Saeed simply replied, 3M options as all other directors and $40,000 cash compensation. $3 million of stock options. $3 million stock options. Woo-wee. That's from the horse's mouth, bro. That's fucking crazy. That tells you right. I mean, they don't mince words. They're like, oh, well, you know, the $3 million in stock options and a $40,000 slap on the hand wasn't exactly, you know, making them think that prohibition's cool anymore. So there's a last couple of things I got here before I go. We're talking about problematic marijuana use, which is declining. Sure, among people who consume it every day. Because, and I'm just going to summarize this up right now by saying what the data has shown is that people are less likely to consider marijuana use problematic, whether it be the people using it themselves, because the stigma has been kind of busted there, or whether it's people around them, their bosses, their coworkers, their family members, friends. You know, they don't understand marijuana if they're saying things like, man, that marijuana is making you stupid or lazy or any of that shit. That's just them observing behavior and then attributing it to marijuana. I could go and read this, but it's really just a matter of the stigma. I think that this is almost 100% stigma related. And that's what I like to report on, is that the marijuana stigma is definitely going bye-bye. And this is the kind of story I wish I could see every time I looked at marijuana health news. 3 weeks ago, Kyle Yeager published this: marijuana use tied to lower rates of depression and suicidal ideation among PTSD patients. People suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, who consume marijuana experience significantly fewer depressive episodes and lower rates of suicidal ideation compared to non-users, according to a new study. The research, published in the Journal of Psychopharmacology on Tuesday, analyzed nationally representative health data from Statistics Canada's 2012 Community Health Survey and found that people with PTSD who have not reported past year marijuana use is much more likely to have suicidal thoughts and go through depressive phases. So if you got PTSD and you're not smoking weed, you're thinking about killing yourself a lot more. That's what it says. More than 24,000 people who are eligible for the study which was conducted by researchers at the British Columbia Center on Substance Use and University of British Columbia. 420 were clinically diagnosed with PTSD. Of those 106 individuals with PTSD, 28.2% of them said they used cannabis in the past year. That's markedly higher than the average of those who didn't have PTSD, which is 11.2%. We know that with limited treatment options for PTSD. So I'm sorry if that kind of went by you, but people that have PTSD use marijuana more than people that don't, just generally speaking. And it's like almost triple the amount. So there you go. Many patients have taken to medicating with cannabis to alleviate their symptoms. Stephanie Lake, lead author of the study, said in a press release, quote, "However, this is the first time the results from a nationally representative study have shown the potential benefits of treating the disorder with cannabis. Those suffering from PTSD who didn't report past year cannabis use were about 7 times as likely to have experienced a recent major depressive episode, the study found. They were also 4.3 times as likely to have contemplated suicide." And unfortunately, the VA don't have like people doing this kind of study there for them and their patients, because this guy here, he's calling for it now, even though he blocked it the whole time he was administrator back in 2017 and 18. So I say to you, fuck you, buddy. But at least when he got off the job, he's doing the right thing. Like, that always happens. When somebody's in a corrupt, shitty, broken government and their whole career they're doing evil, awful, shitty things, like opposing research for PTSD for fucking veterans, then when they get out of office, they start talking about good things and doing nice things or painting pictures like George Bush. But when you're, prohibitionist and you get out, the way you make yourself feel better about it, I guess, is you go open up a weed business or sit on a weed board. I'm going to leave you with a couple of things that aren't the most pleasant things to watch. Oh, damn, the video has been removed. All right, well, we won't relive this then, because this was a long time ago. But it's just another example of this over-enforcement of CBD. And as we talk about hemp and the regulations, as we talk about Scott Gottlieb, who would never under his watch allow CBD to be actuated or totally liberated, whether it's hemp-derived or just some shit you can make in a lab out of some bacteria. We got I Can't Breathe video showing a grandmother with arthritis arrested for CBD at Disney World. And I hope that lawsuit is huge. And besides that, we had this guy that was a cancer patient who the guy got searched for weed because he said he used medical marijuana to treat it. And it's just the stigma is going away, but it's still in the law enforcement community. I think it's mostly ignorance more than stigma, as they've been taught their whole lives and then through all their law enforcement training that drugs are the enemy and drug people are the enemy and you got to fucking go hard on them because they might have guns and needles in their pockets. So I think a lot of that, the only way we're going to do something about that is to re-educate people altogether, man. And last but not least, Thorne Peters found dead in prison. Wow. That was bad. That was a bad thing to find out happened. He seemed to, if anybody followed Thorne Peters, he was the no man's RIA defense. If what you're doing doesn't harm anybody else, it's not a crime, essentially. And he did a lot of the things that activists will do, like sold weed right out in front of the police station, and he got arrested in February of 2015 on charges of selling cannabis and for possessing a firearm during the crime. He was booked into possession in December of 2018. He lost a court appeal earlier this year to overrule the gun charge and lower his sentence. So a media release from the Shelby County Division of Corrections said Peters was discovered unresponsive in his cell by corrections staff. He was housed in an individual cell, according to corrections officials, and had no cellmates. So he was Jeffrey Epstein. And, this happened a while ago. Not really. 20 days ago, November 4th is when this came through. And there still is no update on what happened to him, how he died. But we have this down here to go on, if anything can be used as a guide. There's rumors he got Epstein by the multi-agency gang unit for finding out who's been trafficking drugs into the prisons. Aha. It'd be nice if there was some kind of investigation to clear multi-agency gang unit's name of this accusation, but since this will never happen, while cover up anything but a pothole Strickland is mayor, it's just going to be another stain on the reputation of our uniformed law enforcement officers and end in even less compliance by criminals with police. I mean, you know, knowing that a 4-year possession sentence is really a death sentence removes any incentive a criminal in Memphis has to go quietly and submit to arrest without a preemptive violence. I honestly feel sorry for this well-meaning police in this city having to carry the taint of these accidentally on purpose bad faith deaths of people the politicians in this town find inconvenient. The job of police would be so much easier if leadership of the city did the bare minimum of healing citizen mistrust of law enforcement, but instead we get more mysterious deaths. I'm not saying that he got Epsteined, but I am probably saying he probably got Epstein. Like, why? What the fuck? He didn't look unhealthy at all, and they're not even saying it looked like it was suicide. The last videos I seen of him, he looked pretty good to go as he was getting ready to ship off. But yeah, I was friends with him on Facebook. He followed my channel and watched my videos. He even commented in several of them. And I feel like, you know, he was a kindred spirit. He was a little bit more flamboyant than most marijuana activists. And we love those kind of people here in the marijuana activist circles. So rest in peace, Thorne Peters. And just like Jeffrey Epstein, I don't think we'll ever find out the real answers as to what the fuck happened in that jail cell that fateful day. And that's all I got this time. Like I said, I think I'm going to make a video about that Vice thing, talking about the corporate takeover, because that's what I do. And you can catch me on this channel until it gets vaporized by YouTube, because I'm pretty sure it's going to happen eventually. When you talk about the truth and you tell the truth, they don't like you. That's it. Have a nice day. Bye.